Please join me in welcoming Peter Swartz, co-founder and Chief Science Officer of Altana. He will demonstrate how Altana Atlas uses AI to generate supply chain insights.
All right. Thank you for the kind intro. Can everyone hear me okay? Coming through? Great. So today I'm going to talk about economic and national security through AI-powered supply chain resilience. When I talk about this, what am I talking about fundamentally? I'm talking about the construction of trusted value chains that can help manage the complexity of our current world. It's no surprise to anyone here that we are living through two disruptions. The first is the end of the current era of globalization. The world is becoming much more complex and turbulent, and the current era of free trade is unlikely to persist. Second is the rise of modern AI technology that allows us to thrive in this complexity. So global supply chains are, by their very nature, a complex system, and AI allows us to handle the billions of transactions, the hundreds of millions of companies that are involved in such a complex system. And thus we have an unprecedented opportunity to build new systems that are more resilient, fairer, do not involve things like forced labor, but also can be more efficient, saving hundreds of millions of dollars, as just one real example. Today, I'm not going to show you a live demo of the product, but I'm rather going to show you a series of snapshots, and that's due to the sensitivity of some of the subjects involved. For more information, we will have a live demo at our booth. It's no surprise to anyone who we're here, the world's becoming more turbulent. We see the return of great power competition, rapidly changing policy, tariffs and sanctions that result. We see a rise in disruptions from both natural disasters and geopolitical reasons, disruptions to Suez, Panama. You see the imposition of carbon tariffs, the need to do massive reporting across the value chain, and also, as the world fragments, the rise of insecurity and crime, which thrives in these types of scenarios. This complexity and this fragmentation implies the need, both explicit and implicit, to have trusted value chains. So what is a trusted value chain? By a value chain, I mean the steps in production of a physical good, all the way from extraction through the intermediate processes to their final distribution. By a trust, I mean understanding every step of that and being able to certify that it does not involve, let's say, sanctions evasion or illicit activity, and simultaneously is robust and resilient and can function even through disruption. AI, of course, is fantastic for this. It can allow us both to construct this dynamic, intelligent map of the global supply chain that I'm going to show you today, allowing us to manage this data at scale, but it also brings superhuman speed of action and massive internal and external productivity gains. In such a complex system like I'm talking about, global value chains, global supply chains, the state of play is already quite bad. Most folks can see 1 degree out. And by getting these gains, it's not just that you can do current processes more efficiently, you can actually, and we see this in our own work, gains as much as 10 or 20x in some processes. This causes completely new capabilities and options to become available. For example, the issuance of trade insurance, which is one subject that we work upon for disruption to value chains. I don't want you all to think that we're naive to the nuances here, and I'm sure you're not either, but fundamentally, I'm going to present hybrid systems that are explainable and are based on a source of truth, that are based on their source documents, and that are tested for bias and reliability, and respect data sovereignty, privacy, and security. And all of these things are possible through more nuanced engineering, which I'm going to describe to you today. So how do you think about managing such a complex world and such a complex system? We break it down into 3 main aspects: C, focus, act. By C, I mean constructing a representation of the global supply chain, taking billions of records that are in every major and some minor languages, fusing them together and understand the supplier of the supplier, the buyer of the buyer, even when there's no unique identifiers, even when there are misspellings or ambiguity. Focus. How do you understand who you should engage with as a good business partner, or maybe a target for supply chain insurance, or who should you focus upon as a likely producer of illicit fentanyl? And then act. What action should you take? And this can go all the way from decision support, where the AI recommends an action, like perhaps you should investigate this company, or perhaps you should consider diversifying in this manner with an additional supplier in a different geography. And then full automation. What should go into a green lane and move quickly through a border for cargo? Many of you use global entry. Imagine the same thing for shipments. That's what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go through 4 use cases today, and I'll just note that given this venue, most of these are focused on the government use case. All of that said, for those of you that are in the private sector, I hope you will see the applicability and the generality of these techniques, and certainly we apply them there as well. Both corporations and governments face the complexity that I'm describing here today. So let's talk about sanctions, exposure, and evasion. Understanding exposure to sanctions requires understanding the multiple steps, the value chain that go into the production of the product. It might be in tier 3, where you are exposed to a given entity. You'll want to go through and you want to be able to order all of the products that you're handling. And if you're a corporation, you might have tens of thousands of these product categories or SKUs. If you're a government and you're trying to analyze a national economy, you'll have millions. You're trying to go through and then order all of them, both by their resiliency, by their exposure, et cetera. And here I'm showing you exposure to sanctioned entities. These are demo examples, of course. But let's go through and order it, and you'll see there's thousands of companies in the extended multiple tiers for the production of this good. And then within it, in one case, we are exposed in multiple ways, and in this example, it's both things like forced labor, but also sanctions, to denied parties. Here's an obfuscated view of that, where you can see in the tier 3 exposure to a Russian sanctioned entity in the production of the aircraft and spacecraft parts. We also might wish to analyze evasion. What I'm showing you here today is actually 2 bad things at once. The first is evasion of forced labor legislation related to the Xinjiang region in China. So forced labor product from that region is presumed to involve forced labor because of the camps there, unless proven otherwise. What I show you here is companies that have not proven otherwise, right here in yellow, transshipping electronic goods through Vietnam that then go to US companies. And what this allows us to do is to understand this behavior at scale and then stop it. The second thing that's happening here, and I'll talk more about this in a second, is tariff evasion. So there is they're benefiting from 1/5 the tariff by claiming it comes from Vietnam. This is, of course, illegal and harms companies that are competing fairly. The second is assisting economic security and resilience. So, we've talked about stopping bad things. How do we actually ensure that companies can function in this increasingly turbulent world? Or, again, if you're managing a national economy at scale or a defense industrial base, how do you understand the bottlenecks or potential inabilities to produce your critical goods? What I've shown you here is a diagram, and I'm going to show you some screenshots in a second, where you can see company C is a bottleneck, and company E is a company that's had some sort of event. And to go back to that framework, this C Focus Act, Scene allows you to construct this entire map, to understand this across all of the materials, fusing in a private deployment, the bill of materials, the suppliers, etc. And then Focus is identifying the bottleneck, and Act is the recommended actions, of course.
Okay.
So if we take a look here, you see a bottleneck analysis comparing it to peer companies in that space. You can often offer then insurance around that, as indeed we do. You see here the real-time monitoring, fictional company here, but real example of the types of events you might see. A natural disaster in tier 3 that's going to make it so you can't make your critical good. And this can be seen in real time because you've already mapped out the value chain and you can then react to it. And then finally, the avoidance of geopolitical competitors in your supply chain. So of course, in the context of certain types of electronics or other types of secure goods, it's very important that they not have backdoors. We're a geopolitical competitor. To have the ability to input hardware with backdoors, this of course leads to threat and the non-functioning of the equipment in question. Identifying and stopping that is, again, another use of such a value chain. Let's talk about targeting criminal activity. So I think you all may be aware of the tragedy that has happened in North America around fentanyl production. So due to the fentanyl trafficking and illicit activity, more Americans and Canadians are dying each year than died in the entire Vietnam War and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It was about 100,000 last year. How do we deal with this? This is a value chain that is completely untrusted that we wish to disrupt. You can, of course, do it manually through the type of systems, leveraging just the C functionality that I just talked about. Seeing being you have this network, and here you see the fusion of illicit actors leveraging illicit supply chains and sourcing the chemicals they need to make it. The illicit actors are in yellow. But you can also, of course, use AI systems to target it. And what I want to emphasize to you is this. You could score all of the companies in the world for their likelihood, but you still need explanations. Do not go with sort of unexplainable AI. This is tied to a source of truth with systems that highlight the individual shipments and then write up the justifications for their decisions here. This is critical to disrupting this terrible tragedy that's happening here. And of course, this system is somewhat obfuscated, but you see the promise to handle this complexity at scale. And then, of course, let's take it to the shipment level. We wish to go through and clear good shipments quickly, and I talked about full automation. This is ACT right here. Let's move the good stuff quickly with high trust, and then flag the problematic shipments with justification for targeting and search and inspection. Then you can boost your economy and at the same time stop illicit activity. I want to conclude this by talking about ensuring fair competition for national value chains. I think this is an issue that touches all of us, whether we're in the public or the private sector. You wish to ensure, and I show you here an example of collecting taxes correctly for tariffs, but what are the point of these tariffs? In many cases, the point of these tariffs or countervailing duties or otherwise are to ensure that goods are not dumped at low prices to disrupt domestic industry, or that overcapacity from non-market activity, such as subsidies, does not stop the production and the fair competition for goods in countries that do not engage in that. Of course, I showed you before the tariff evasion related to the electronic components. But let's talk about misdeclaration. Another way to evade tariffs is to go through and declare an HS code or harmonized system code that receives less of a tariff. This is just the tariff category. What you see here is the ability to determine that automatically, and then on the right, a justification for that referencing the laws written up by large language models. Again, a hybrid system that knows its own sources, that knows the legislation, and is able to draw from that. You can do the same thing with valuation of goods. You want to go through, you want to identify what is undervalued, because what is overcapacity? It is just undervaluation and flooding with low-value goods, a given market, and then destroys, say, a domestic steel industry. This is an example of understanding that and then flagging the goods that are undervalued. And then I'll conclude with just two examples here. One around scope 3. So in Europe, for example, they are dealing with the problem that foreign companies that do not comply with the same environmental regulation are flooding their market with goods that their domestic producers cannot compete for things like steel, aluminum, fertilizer, etc. What I show you here is the ability of AI to go through a value chain, what you see on the right, flag the hotspots, and then make an estimate for the overall product, the vehicle gearbox, and then again go through and rank all of the products by that and their difference versus the tariff assumption or the baseline assumption. So the ability then to understand hotspots, to improve your value chain as an enterprise to benefit from this, and then also fairness for domestic producers. And I think this is a general idea that you can understand far more than just related to CBAM. So just to conclude here then, what I've shown you is AI for managing the global value chain. I put it to you that understanding the physical commerce of the world as a value chain and understanding trust through that is the way that we can then ensure fair trade and fair activity globally without having the current excesses and problems that we see here that create unfair competition and threats to national and economic security and resiliency. See, focus, act are the procedures to do this. Thank you so much.